but the Justice Department's decision on the Brooks case, does that have any impact on how they might approach Donald Trump as a civil defendant in the same kind of lawsuit?
It certainly does, Lawrence. The Justice Department's brief not only said that it is no part of the job of any congressperson to attack Congress, to incite insurrection, it pointedly said it's no part of any federal employee's job to do any of those things, that inciting an unruly, partly armed and violent mob to kick ass and to take names and to interfere with an official function of Congress is well beyond the sphere of any federal employee's official duties and is therefore not immune from liability, especially under the so-called Ku Klux Klan Act, which is part of this lawsuit, an act passed way back in the 1860s that has two important parts. One part says that if you work with other people to interfere with the performance of the government's functions, that is, if you conspire to undo the workings of government, you are going to be liable. And the other part, very important as to Donald Trump, says that if you have the power to prevent an ongoing interference, especially a violent one, with the functions of the government, and do not use that power, are negligent and turn the other way, as we saw Donald Trump doing when he and his family were yucking it up and watching on a TV screen as the riot went on, then you are liable for damages to those you injure. In this case, that would include not only people like Congressman Swalwell, who feared for his life, but also a number of the brave Capitol Police who are also suing. So this is an important development, not just for Mo Brooks. Don't want to underestimate his importance, but he's not the biggest fish in the pond. But it's a terribly important development for the ultimate accountability of the guy who organized a lot of what went on that day and did nothing to stop it as people were being crushed almost to death in some cases.
On that point that you raised, the element of the lawsuit that involves the president doing absolutely nothing while the attack was going on. We have now an increasing body of discovery of a sort through these new books that are coming out detailing that day and what Donald Trump was doing that day. That material is now all available to the lawyers in the Swalwell lawsuit. They can use that as the basis for subpoenas to people like Ivanka Trump, who is reported in that book, in some of the books, as having gone to her father repeatedly to say, you've got to do something, and he didn't do anything, and others, and the manipulations that they were trying to do. And they were specifically, there's reports of Donald Trump just specifically actively refusing to do anything. All of that can be lifted out of what is now the book context and put in under oath depositions by the witnesses who actually participated in that as this lawsuit goes forward. Isn't that what we'll see in the discovery process?
Exactly, and we'll certainly see this very powerful committee that Nancy Pelosi has put together that includes people like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, and of course Adam Schiff and Jamie Raskin and a number of others. A committee that is going to hear evidence directly from some of the people who were in communication with the White House at the time. Jim Jordan can't quite remember whether he didn't talk to the president or did talk to the president during that time, but he's going to have to refresh his memory. And the Justice Department has made clear that executive privilege is not going to be available in many of these cases. So we are witnessing the unraveling of the cover-up of the worst insurrection since the Civil War in the history of this country. This is serious, and it's not going to end well for Donald Trump. Although he's squeezed out of all kinds of fixes before, and I wouldn't underestimate him. He's a very slippery eel.